Good morning. I was standing out there before Mass watching everybody driving in on the big, beautiful road, and it's just, I know it seems boring, but it was just so joyful now that it's finally paved. Next week they're going to plant some trees and bushes and whatnot to try to hide the big ditch, because the big ditch is not beautiful, so it needs to be hidden. Yesterday morning I was at the Archdiocesan Anniversary Mass for couples celebrating their 50th and 60th wedding anniversaries. My parents are going into their 50th year. They celebrate in May, so I went to celebrate the Mass with the Archbishop. And it was real beautiful to see, dozens of couples that were celebrating 50 and 60 years, just a real testimony to love and commitment. The Archbishop started his homily with a joke, which I'm going to steal, but I'm going to make it better. He said there was this man who traveled a lot for business, and he was in Manhattan, and he finds himself on Fifth Avenue in front of Saks, and he decides he's going to go into Saks Fifth Avenue and buy his wife some perfume. Women wear perfume. And he goes to the counter, and he asks the lady there, he says, "Can you bring me a nice bottle of perfume I'd like to get for my wife?" And so she goes, and she brings back this, bottle of Creed perfume that was like $700, and he's like, "Ooh, that's a little bit much. Maybe something not as nice." So comes back again with another, slightly lesser bottle, maybe like a Chanel, whatever that costs, a few $100s, and looks at it and no, that's still a little too much. Can you bring me something else? So he goes back, brings something, really small little bottle. It's like $50, and here you go. This is what I've got for you, so you can get your wife. And he says, "Can you show me something really cheap?" And so she goes back and she comes out with this beautiful silver mirror, and she holds it up to him so that he can look at himself. And all week I've known exactly what I want to preach about, but I didn't know how to start until yesterday, and that wasn't really the start. I just thought I'd tell that funny joke, because yesterday was Valentine's Day as well. But when we look at this, all three readings really, St. Paul says, "We speak a wisdom to those who are mature, not a wisdom of this age, nor the rulers of this age who are passing away." And I've been thinking to myself all week, gosh, the wisdom of this age is just not very wise. And we need to recognize how we ought to look to how God has established things and how God has put things together. And then looking at the reading from the book of Sirach, he says, "If you choose, you can keep the commandments and they will save you." Right? So if you do what God has commanded, you will be saved. If you do what God has commanded, you will be following him. If you listen to eternal wisdom, not the wisdom of the age, then you will be able to follow God and you will be able to enter into his kingdom. The wisdom of the age today says lots of crazy things. The wisdom of the age today encourages young people not to get married, but rather just to, shack up and cohabitate. The wisdom of the age today encourages young people not necessarily to have children either, or not start families early on. In fact, even kind of looks at young people who get married and start a family early as foolish. The wisdom of the age is very confused as to what marriage is. Marriage is between one man and one woman, and it's an expression of love that is open to life, right? Marriage is supposed to produce children. That's the point of marriage. The wisdom of the age is very confused as to why that's important. So often people say, "Why do you care?" Right? Who cares what two consenting adults do? Who cares if they have marriage as well? Well, I care because marriage is something that goes all the way back to the beginning of creation. In a marriage mass, the prayers of the mass talk about marriage as being the only institution that survived from creation. It's the only institution that survived through the flood. And it's an institution that is so important and so central to our lives that Christ elevates it to a sacrament. And so marriage is essential for human flourishing. If we don't have marriages that are holy, if we don't have marriages that produce life, then we don't have a future. And so it's no wonder that marriage has been under attack from the very beginning of creation, right? The devil strives to separate and divide Adam and Eve. Adam is a failure as a husband because he's standing there with his wife as she's being tempted by the devil. And rather than being bold and courageous and saying, hey, honey, maybe we don't want to listen to that snake. Good lesson. If a snake ever tells you to do something, probably shouldn't do it. But all the way there at the beginning, Adam's a coward. He doesn't want to correct his wife. How many husbands are ever in that situation where they don't want to speak up for fear of perhaps, some sort of reprimand or some sort of whatever it may be, consequence? And then we look at how marriage has degraded over the last 30, 40, 50, 60 years in particular. Jesus and the gospel is talking about marriage and the importance of marriage, and he's saying, hey, listen, I'm not here to get rid of any of the laws. I know, people want to think of Jesus and, he's just like, hey, everybody, I'm a hippie. Love is love. You do you. Just everybody, get along and sing Kumbaya. But Jesus is saying, no. I'm not here to abolish the law. I'm here to fulfill it. So, yeah, you're not supposed to kill people, right? I say, even if you get angry at other people, even if you call your neighbor a fool. Gosh, I've called people words way worse than fools before. Thankfully, we don't have to do that U-turn anymore, so there aren't as many people that are getting that anger. But Jesus says if you've even called your neighbor a fool, it's akin to murder. It's akin to killing somebody. And then he goes on and he says, whoever divorces his wife must give her a bill of divorce, is what you've heard. But I say whoever divorces his wife causes her to commit adultery, and whoever marries a divorced woman commits adultery. Those are really powerful words. And we look and we say, why is the Catholic Church so, hung up on this and like the whole annulment thing, right? Father Bradley's got to go and study all those boring laws so he can figure out, how to declare marriages were null and void, right? Because they're unlawful. Why does the church care so much about that? Why does the church say, oh, no, you can't get remarried? But I got this piece of paper from the government that says I'm no longer married, so I can get a new piece of paper from the government that says I'm married to somebody else, even though I'm still married to that other person in the eyes of God. And there's been discussion for the last several years about, how do we take people who are married and divorced and remarried and integrate them into the life of the church sacramentally? Right? That's not to say you can't come to church, but how do we integrate them into the sacramental life? Well, we can't unless we ignore the words of Jesus, right? Unless we ignore him saying, whoever divorces his wife causes her to commit adultery. Whoever marries a divorced woman commits adultery. But we live in a time where the wisdom of the age says, yeah, adultery, no big deal, whatever, right? People fall out of love. We live in the wisdom of the age where it just says, yeah, marriage isn't really all that important. If we go back to the 1960s, kind of the height of the sexual revolution, there were the rumors that Pope St. Paul VI was going to be writing an encyclical called Humanae Vitae on human life, really a prophetic encyclical that he wrote. And people were prepared saying, oh, the church is modernizing, the church is going to embrace all the modern ways, the church is going to embrace the secular life, the church is going to embrace all our great modern pieces of wisdom, most especially contraception. That's our favorite one. And Pope Paul VI put out this encyclical and he said, hey, we cannot embrace this. And of course people said, what's that old man know, right? Old man in Rome, he's not even married. And he said, if we embrace this, families are going to fall apart. If we embrace this, divorce is going to become rampant. If we embrace this, it's going to lead to abortion. If we embrace this, it's going to lead to redefinitions of marriage, of things that aren't marriage. Gosh, he was right. And people were mad about it. Professors, priests, all sorts of people all over the world were saying, don't worry, he's not going to do this. And then when he did, they said, just ignore him. He doesn't know what he's talking about. And for decades, probably many of you were told by priests, just follow your conscience, right? Sure, the church teaches that, says don't use contraception, don't do these things, but just follow your conscience. For thousands of years, the Judeo-Christian moral system has existed to protect people. When we stop following it, when we stop striving to live a life of morality, people get hurt. We look all around us and we see how people are hurting. And so what's the solution? It's a return to the moral life. And how do we do that? We start with ourselves. We look around and we say, how can we strive to embrace the moral life? I'm always full of hope with this parish. It's such a beautiful parish. There's so many great people. There's so many families, young and old alike. Families that embrace life. Families that love life. Families that are open to life. There's like 20 plus pregnant women in the parish right now. I love it. There's going to be so many baptisms happening. We're going to have to maybe we can fill up the big ditch and we'll just do baptisms down there. That'll be fun. But so often we look to young families and we might think, gosh, you're so young. Do you really need to have that many kids? Or we look and we're like, gosh, maybe, space them out a little bit more. Hey, haven't you ever heard of TV? Yeah, it gets real old. I remember growing up, I was the youngest of 4, and I thought that our family was a small family because we had, the families with the Irish last names that had 6, 7, 8, 9 kids that, had to drive 2 cars to get to church. And we look at those families and we say, oh, that's good for them, Glad I don't have all those kids. But what a spirit opposed to life. What a spirit that rejects the goodness, the beauty of life. What a spirit that rejects the desire to do the will of God. And so we need to reclaim marriage. We need to reclaim families. We need to reclaim what it means to be parents. We need to live not just for our retirement, live not just so that we can travel, live not just so we can play golf, live not so that we can just live according to our own will and our own ways, but rather that we can live in order to do God's will, which is difficult. It's difficult to do God's will. It's easy to go out and sin. It's easy to listen to the wisdom of the world, to say, oh yeah, I'll just, forget morality. Who needs that, right? Boring old dad telling us what to do. Have you ever thought of the fact that boring old dad is old for a reason, that he's still alive, right? Because he's lived a good life. He's striven to live the Christian moral life. Hey, thank you. Little pro-life nugget out there. Right? Because if the church isn't crying, it's dying. And a church that has more funerals than it does baptisms is a sad church. You done? Oh, here comes your brother. Okay, there you go. And your mom. Okay. And so it's so essential for us that in our desire to reclaim the culture as best as we can, right? We used to call our culture, or our society, Christendom, right? Everybody was Christian. Everything kind of functioned in a Christian worldview. Now we're post-Christendom. We're living kind of back in an apostolic age. We're living kind of in the mission field where we can't just presume that everybody knows about God. We're so many young people who were raised in families that didn't go to church, or were raised in families where their parents were divorced. Millennials are like the biggest group impacted by divorce because so many millennial parents were divorced. I remember as a kid, my parents were having a strong disagreement one day in the kitchen, and I was overhearing it. And then my mom noticed that I was upset and I was crying. She said, "Why are you crying?" And I said, "Well, because you and Dad are going to get divorced because you had an argument." And my mom said, "Divorce is not a word that we use in this house." And it's always stuck with me, right? It's always stuck with me. And now they've made it to 50 years. But so many of my friends, their parents were divorced, and it was just kind of like normal. And so we must start with ourselves to reclaim the families as we find ourselves in this mission field to proclaim God, to proclaim Christ. And we proclaim Christ to people who haven't heard of him. And so many of these young people, as I've told you, they come to the church looking for answers. They've been lied to. They've been sold a bill of lies by the wisdom of the ages. They've been told you can be whatever you want when you grow up. When you grow up, you can be an NFL quarterback. No, you can't. When you grow up, you can be an astronaut. I'll puke if you put me in the spinny thing. When you grow up, you can do anything you want because you are the source of your own destiny. Not, we can do the will of God. If we do the will of God, we'll be happy. If we don't just strive and look for all the things that the world has, but rather do his will, we'll be happy. We may not have everything, right? We may not, have all the stuff of the world, but we'll be happy. And so these people who have been just utterly lied to, they come to the church, and it's the last place where they think that they would ever end up. I don't know how I could possibly be in a Catholic church. I was raised atheist. I tried Christianity. I tried to do the easy, soft Christianity in the big warehouse churches, but it didn't really, there was no meat there. And so now I find myself in the Catholic Church, and you're talking about truths that have existed forever. You're talking about truths that for 2,000 years the church has taught and enforced, that for thousands of years before that the Jews enforced and followed, that even before that, even before Revelation, that ancient pagans figured out. That Socrates and Plato and Aristotle, that they looked and they just said, yeah, we probably shouldn't kill people. Good idea. And they're coming and they're seeing it in the church, and they're embracing it, and they're living it. And they're saying, oh yeah, look at all these other things that the church says. The church says marriage is really important. The church says we should reject contraception. The church says we should protect marriage. We should stand up for marriage. All of these things that the church says are so wise. And when we follow them, when we listen to them, we won't get hurt. So next week we start with Lent. Ash Wednesday is already upon us, that sad day where we have to fast and be gloomy, right? Actually, the gospel says the opposite. But for the last several years, I think in this parish, we have really lived Lent well. Father Starr asked me last night, he said, does this parish do Lent well? I said, I think we do, yeah. Really focusing on prayer, fasting, and almsgiving. What in our lives do we need to cut off or pluck out? Jesus says, if your eye causes you to sin, pluck it out. If your hand causes you to sin, cut it off. Jesus doesn't want us mutilating our bodies. But what things in our lives, what habits in our lives cause us to sin? Maybe it's out while we're driving, right? Maybe it's while we're at home and we're watching TV because we have Fox News on 24 hours a day. Maybe it's because we're hanging out with the people that we shouldn't be hanging out with. Maybe it's because we have a habit that we shouldn't have. Use Lent as an opportunity to cut that stuff all off, to throw it in the fire. Don't bring it back at Easter, right? That wouldn't make much sense to give up a vice during Lent only to bring it back at Easter. But to just take all that awful, rotten, bad, nasty stuff in our lives that's in our heart and just cut it all out, throw it away, burn it, and we'll be happy. So as we continue with this Holy Mass, let us pray that God will reveal to us what it is in our lives that we need to allow him to refine and to allow him to perfect, because we are all called to have righteousness that surpasses that of the scribes and Pharisees so that we can enter into the kingdom of heaven.